Welcome to Session 1 in Stream 2, Looking Through the Lens of Diversity. I'm Liz Pia, moderator for today's session. Our first speakers today are Cori, Kleisinger, and Tina Miller, who will be speaking about their Cedar Blankets project and increasing access for Indigenous women, children, and youth. If you are in the wrong session, please navigate to the session by clicking on the session you would like to attend. If you have any questions, please utilize the chat section and ask Cori or Tina at the end of the session. Please use the chat section at any time. Cori is a mother and grandmother of 6 and has worked in the anti-violence field with families in a variety of roles from frontline to management and brings more than 25 years experience in Indigenous and non-Indigenous urban communities. Cori, born in Winnipeg during Manitoba's 60s scoop, is from mixed heritage, Ojibwe and Irish. Cori uses the privilege assigned by her European appearance and wealth of lived experience to advocate for social justice and to making space for Indigenous families and communities to bring their teachings and traditions forward for the health and benefit of future generations coming up. Tina is a member of the Nisga'a Nation from the village of Lagalta and Ganada Frog Tribe and has lived in Syilx territory, also known as Kelowna, West Kelowna, BC, for 20 years. She is a single mother to 4 children and a Gigi to 2 grandsons. She has lived experience in being the CEO of the household, chef, personal cheerleader, housekeeper, judge mom, family therapist, errand runner, finance manager, personal assistant for the entire family. She is a master of thinking on your feet. Tina has a Bachelor of Business Administration focusing on marketing and communications and has volunteered with the Patient Voices Network, BC Patient Safety Quality Council, and the Health Standards Organization of Canada since 2016. She has worked with BC Society of Transition Houses as research and outreach coordinator for the Cedar Blankets Project since March 2022. Welcome, Cori and Tina, and thank you for this being speakers today.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm Cori Kleisinger, and I'm calling into you from Musqueam territory in BC. It is still dark here. It's early. Not that early, but early enough that it's still dark here. And I'd just like to take a moment, if I can, to acknowledge this territory that we're on, and the ancestors, the peoples who've looked after this territory for a long time, forever, and my gratitude for them allowing me to come and work and play and live on this land here. Yeah, and I'll pass it over to Tina.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Cori. I echo your statement where it is still dark over here. It is a little chilly. It's a beautiful fall morning so far. The sun is starting to come up. And I am joining this webinar from the unceded ancestral and traditional land of the Syilx Okanagan people. I'm very grateful to have been able to live here for over 20 years with my 4 children and now 2 grandsons. Thank you all for being here today and this morning. I am looking forward to sharing with you our journey so far and the project Cedar Blankets. With that being said, I'm going to move along here. The BC Society of Transition Houses is a member-based provincial umbrella organization that through leadership, support, and collaboration enhances the continuum of services and strategies to respond to, prevent, and end violence against women, children, and youth. The BC Society of Transition Houses office is located on unceded Coast Salish territory shared by the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Today, the BC Society of Transition Houses supports an extensive network of member organizations that represent anti-violence workers throughout British Columbia who provide services in women's transitional housing, safe homes, second stage houses, third stage houses, and peace counseling programs for children and youth. Their services, programs, and projects are making a difference in thousands of lives each day. With that, Cori, I'm going to pass it over to you to share our journey so far.
So when we, as Tina was saying, we are an organization that represents member agencies in BC. So we're provincial, and we have some member agencies that are also in the Northwest Territories and the Yukon. So we're actually, I guess that would make us like national, right? Or international. So Cedar Blankets is a project that's very near and dear to my heart. We started this project when back in 2014, and I started as a participant while I was working in the front line. So we partnered with Reciprocal Consulting to gather information because transition houses told us that Indigenous women here were not accessing services as often as could be predicted or could be guessed at, or certainly not equal to the amount of violence there is against Indigenous women out on the coast here, on the West Coast. So we partnered with Reciprocal Consulting to gather information to try and figure out why that is. So in 2016, BCSTH and Reciprocal Consulting gathered together, and we started a program called Access to Transition Housing for Indigenous Women. In 2018, BCSTH piloted an online course called Increasing Access for Women, Indigenous Women, and in 2019, input from transition houses and safe home staff reiterated that improving access for Indigenous women and their children was important to the mission of anti-violence, which moves us to why is this work so important? So despite being disproportionately victimized by violence, our research tells us that Indigenous women and their children access transition homes and safe home programs less frequently, leave them earlier than non-Indigenous staff. So we had sharing circles from around the province when we were first collecting research, and to ask Indigenous women here why they felt like they weren't comfortable in transition homes. And so their reasons included fear of overt or covert racism, fear that entering a transition house will result in an apprehension of their children, or fear that confidentiality or personal agency would not be respected. So we took all that information together and Cedar Blankets was born. So I think I'll pass it over to you, Tina. Maybe you can describe a bit about our pilot sites that are the heart of our project.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cori. The BC Society of Transition Houses invited member organizations who were interested in taking part in the Cedar Blankets project to submit an application to transform their current transition house and safe home services practices in order to reduce barriers for Indigenous women and their children seeking safety from violence. Out of the 40 agencies that submitted an application, 4 pilot sites were selected. The first one is Campbell River and North Island Transition Society. They provide programs, support services to women and children on Northern Vancouver Island, BC. Campbell River is a nonprofit registered society and charitable organization. This society was formed in 1985 for the purpose of providing services to women and children struggling with issues of abuse and violence. Campbell River and North Island Transition Society is the umbrella organization for a women's center, Ann Elmore House, Rose Harbor and Society Office, safe homes, and a transition store. Our second pilot site is the Cowichan Women Against Violence Society. They are located in Duncan, and you'll hear from them later today. They're a supportive space for diversity, change, choice, and growth. They offer counseling, advocacy, emergency shelter, community development, and education for every woman. Founded on principles of compassion, dignity, and confidentiality, they aim to support, empower women and children affected by abuse. The third pilot site is Cranbrook Canadian Mental Health Association in the Kootenays, and their mandate is to promote the mental health, wellness, and emotional stability of all individuals within the communities that they serve. And our fourth pilot site is Robson Valley Community Services. They are a charitable nonprofit organization dedicated to strengthening all individuals, families, and communities by providing programs and services and by collaborating within a rural environment. Most of their services do not require a referral and are provided free of charge. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit and we're going to look at shifting paradigms. So I'm just going to, so you can see this a little better. So the BC Society of Transition Houses and Cedar Blankets Project and the 4 pilot sites align themselves together and are putting in the work, time, and energy to transform and change the lives of Indigenous women and children fleeing violence, towards shifting the current paradigms away from what we have always done, taking inspiration from the missing and murdered Indigenous women in Two Spirit Girls Plus final report and calls for justice. And within that final report and the calls for justice, it states, principles for change. Our calls for justice are based on a solid foundation of evidence and law. Witnesses who shared their truths with us also explained that there are many important principles and ideas that must inform the implementation of any of the calls for justice in order for them to be effective and meaningful. A focus on substantive equality and human Indigenous rights. Indigenous women, girls, Two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, and questioning, intersex, and asexual. People are holders of inherent Indigenous rights, constitutional rights, and international and domestic human rights. In addition, many Indigenous peoples in Canada are rights holders under various treaties, land claims, and settlement agreements. As this report affirms, and as the Canadian Human Rights Commission has pointed out, a fundamental premise of this approach is that Indigenous women and girls should not be treated solely as victims, but as independent human rights holders. The human rights-based approach would be a critical element in efforts to bring about a paradigm shift in Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples, particularly Indigenous women and girls. This is because such an approach would reframe issues of importance related to Indigenous women and girls as a denial of rights, instead of unfulfilled needs. Exposure to violence would then be seen as a systemic violation of the rights to gender equality and non-discrimination, requiring broad structural changes, in essence, policing practices and judicial, instead of a symptom of service gaps requiring temporary solutions. This approach would reaffirm Canada's commitment to uphold and promote the human rights of people in vulnerable circumstances. It would also constitute a significant step towards the implementation of Canada's obligations enshrined in international human rights conventions and declarations. Example, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, also known as UNDRIP. These obligations were further outlined in the recommendations made by various international bodies, such as the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The BC Society of Transition Houses has made a commitment to implement over 30 calls for justice within their organization. However, two main calls for justice that Cedar Blanket specifically and directly align with are the following calls for justice. First, in 3.3, we call upon all governments to fully support First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities to call on elders, grandmothers, and other knowledge keepers to establish community-based, trauma-informed programs for survivors of trauma and violence. And the second commitment is 4.7. We call upon all governments to support the establishment and long-term sustainable funding of Indigenous-led, low-barrier shelters, safe spaces, transition homes, second-stage housing, and services for Indigenous women, girls, and people who are homeless, near homeless, dealing with food insecurity, or in poverty, and who are fleeing violence or have been subjected to sexualized violence and exploitation. All governments must ensure that shelters, transitional housing, second stage housing, and services are appropriate to cultural needs and available wherever Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people reside. So I'm going to pass it over to you now, Cori.
Thanks, Tina. So with the calls of justice like in the forefront and through sharing circles with our Indigenous women with lived experience of violence and surveys and interviews with transition house staff and managers, we lovingly combined all that information and created this Cedar Blanket service delivery model. So it represents promising practices that we are testing through this project right now. And its overarching framework is informed by concepts of GBA plus analysis, survivor engagement, cultural safety, and trauma-informed practices. It's a women-centered approach, as you see, with the women in the middle. And it builds wraparound supports encompassing these 6 areas, creating safety, cultural identity, establishing and maintaining partnerships, fostering engagement and empowerment, and finally wrapping all that around in a big blanket of a continuum of support. With women at the center of this, women and children at the center of the circle, that creates holistic safety within transition houses and safe home projects or programs, creating and holding space for women to honor their individual cultural identity, fostering engagement, and empowerment through a woman's direction in her own time, and establishing and maintaining partnerships with local community to support Indigenous healing and practice meaningful allyship. So those are the ways that this whole project has come together to create the service delivery model that honors the woman and her experience, and hopefully will lower what she may see as a barrier to accessing services. That if we can truly center women and children in our service delivery, then they will feel like they have agency. They'll feel like they may feel like they are more welcome. So always in the background of our mind, it's we try to walk the talk that a woman is the expert of her own life. What really key to all of this is the concept of cultural humility and cultural safety. And I'm going to ask Tina if she'd like to talk about that a bit.
Thank you, Cori. Just give me 1 second here. So cultural humility and cultural safety are two key concepts when working with Indigenous women and their families. And if you're practicing cultural humility to ensure a safe environment, your first step would be one of self-reflection about yourself as a person. This might be hard work that is often uncomfortable, but we challenge you to take a step outside your comfort zone, to check in with yourself and look at the core beliefs and values you may have inherited from family, friends, and many institutions we interact with throughout our lifetimes. It's important to remember that cultural humility is not a destination, and it involves ongoing, lifelong learning. In addition to that, there's cultural safety. Culturally safe spaces and practices result from practicing cultural humility. Cultural humility and cultural safety ensure our practices are relational and based on respectful engagement that recognizes and strives to address power imbalances inherent in the anti-violence sector. It results in an environment free of racism and discrimination where people feel safe when receiving care and support. So the Cedar Blanket's road to women-centered, culturally safe, trauma-informed care is, remember in the beginning, based on research, we have learned that Indigenous women and children fleeing violence do not access transition houses or safe homes as often as non-Indigenous women. They leave earlier and engage less with transition house staff and safe home staff. The Cedar Blankets Project's overarching concepts calls on us all in the anti-violence sector to shift how we provide services within our programs and to implement a women-centered, culturally safe, trauma-informed care culture for Indigenous women and children. And this is how Cedar Blankets contributes to shifting paradigms. First, there are 4 pilot sites who are committed to work with the BC Society of Transition Houses project to integrate a transformative change in women-centered, culturally safe, and trauma-informed culture within their organizations, programs, and services. Cedar Blankets has also developed and provided 3 online training courses for all staff of the pilot sites, and that training is ongoing, so as new staff come on board, the training's there, they're sent the link to this training, and it's updated right, like as we add new material. And there's also in-person educations. This year there is a series of 3-day in-person engagement sessions, which built on the online training courses. And it focused on women-centered, culturally safe, trauma-informed components. And there's a lot of hard work in that. Also, Cedar Blankets is an inclusive project inviting the pilot site staff and those who access services to the planning, development, and evaluation of services, and we also include reciprocal in that. And finally, the BC Society of Transition Houses, Cedar Blankets, assists with revisions of policies and procedures to reflect women-centered, culturally safe, trauma-informed care. I'm going to pass it over to you, Cori, if I can get this up here 1 second.
So this is, as we mentioned in the beginning, a WAGE-funded project, and it's a blueprint project. Excuse me. So if you all will stay tuned for our blueprint, this will be the final steps in our journey. So cedar blankets for us represents, excuse me, a paradigm shift. It promotes cultural safe relational practices. It upholds self-determination through the implementation of Indigenous women's councils. So each one of our pilot sites have reached out to their community and the women, Indigenous women who live in their sort of service area or who access their programs and have invited those Indigenous women to speak in a council. So also the great thing about cedar blankets is it's like an organic and flexible, and it's totally individualized and adaptable to any region. In fact, that's one of its biggest gifts is the service delivery model can be picked up and moved anywhere, and should probably be, because each area has different issues, has different things going on around them politically, socially, and all these intersections, of course, we know affect Indigenous women, affect women in our communities, and determine often what the level of violence is. I'm thinking about things like industry and man camps, and in BC here we have like Highway 16, the highway of tears, and in Ontario over that way you would be like heavily influenced possibly by human trafficking or across the border trafficking. So the model can be picked up and moved to any region easily. It's flexible, it's organic, and it's also transferable across sectors besides the the anti-violence sector. My apologies. We've looked at it we've looked at the model in education, we've looked at the model in hospice care, and if nothing else, this service delivery model is a good way for other sectors, other organizations to step aside from how they see themselves as actors in Indigenous women's lives. So the service delivery model and the practices, as I said, are very transferable. So that wraps up our presentation. I think we might be a bit early. We'd love to hear from you or hear questions from you, and just let me say that it's with heartfelt gratitude that that you've all joined us today, and we're so grateful to Abuse Hurts and to WAGE for funding this project.
Thank you, Cori. Thank you, Tina. And thank you to your team at Cedar Blankets. And we look forward to seeing the blueprint. I actually have a question, which I'm going to just refer to my notes. There was a comment on calls for justice, and also you mentioned to reach out to mothers and grandmothers who have experience to bring to the community, to bring to those who have experiences themselves, just how to navigate and foster engagement and empowerment. I love that. I love that piece of it. I wanted to ask if because what your message is out in BC and how you're dealing with it, it's likely globally the same situation. When you mentioned the highways, same situations. It really saddens my heart to know that we're hearing the same narrative. So my question is, with your service delivery model, is there an opportunity, or maybe you already have it in place, for a mentorship program? Because when you mentioned the mothers and grandmothers, I said, oh, wow, can we just start from our young children and have them mentored or even supported by older or peers that they look up to as a community. And that goes for everything with respect to bullying, any type of abusive relationship. So just wanted to get your thoughts on that, like a mentorship program and engaging our mothers and grandmothers as well.
Yeah. So the Indigenous Women's Councils here are representative in this project and in our pilot site testings, are representative of the agencies that that provide services. So Cowichan Women Against Violence, who you'll meet in a few minutes, their Indigenous Women's Council consists of some Indigenous some Cowichan matriarchs. I think they have Métis Kokum there, Métis grandmother, and they're also, as well as us, we have an advisory committee who has an elder and has a youth as well. And so the youth, our youth member is the one who keeps us on track for remembering that these things are not just for us, but they're for, the women coming up and our granddaughters and our great granddaughters and our ahead generations. I think this service delivery model is so flexible that it could become really anything. It could become easily a mentorship program. It could, so let's wait and see what the blueprint tells us.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Cori. I'm really looking forward to that because I love what Cedar Blankets is doing. Tina, did you want to add anything else with respect to just that thought on the mentorship program or reaching out to not only the community partners and the government but mothers and grandmothers? You hit it home when you mentioned those two individuals.
I think Cori did a great job, and a part of the project will be looking at that. And I think also, though, just to remember, it is a blueprint, and Cori mentioned it being individualized to the regions and it being transferable. That being said, you can take it and make it like your own in your area, and go with it. But just these are kind of the blueprint, best practices, shared knowledge, lived experience, and I'm looking forward to it myself, like being a part of this and sharing what we're doing and the work that is being done. And the one thing I've learned from Cori since joining the project is the hard work that goes into it. Because, when your heart and your mind align, you can bring all of this together and shift those paradigms. Okay, thank you.
Just another question that I have is collaboration. What's your thoughts on building a collaborative community in your space? And because I think there's a lot of silos in just the not-for-profits as well. I'm seeing it in multiple situations with various business sectors. Any suggestion on your end to build that collaborative community? And how can, I know it's going to take time, but how can we be successful in achieving a collaboration that even our own not-for-profits don't feel like they're stepping on each other's toes? Like, that's one thing that I've always, why not just ask if we can, even if we're in the same space, let's just work together. So any thoughts on that, Cori, Tina?
So I have some thoughts on that. My thoughts on that are, I feel like if we've always done things in a certain sort of way throughout the nonprofit sector, as well as the for-profit and the government, and I feel like if you want to create a community, a collaborative community, then do it. Just do it. There won't be, what's the worst thing that can happen? The idea is, I suppose, when you're working from your heart, if it's something that you want, then you just start walking towards that vision. So if that, that may mean creating a table that meets once a month and inviting people from different sectors. Like, you might have to be the brave icebreaker. And for us, we had a foot in because we're already a provincial organization. So we have a community of practice that meets, and but it is limited to internal still, because we're in this pilot project. Yes. So, but we do things drastically different. We don't really have agendas. We don't like we're a bunch of women sitting around a virtual table and chatting and talking about things that are important to talk about. And that's how we start. You have to create relations, right? So for anybody who wants to work collectively and collaboratively in that kind of way, that would be my suggestion. I would just think of a question that I wanted answered in my community and invite people from across sectors, because for sure we don't exist in one silo, and problems don't exist in one silo. They exist. It's so intersectional. Violence against women and violence against Indigenous women even more so, right? So invite the police, invite the victim services, invite education, and maybe try and work with frontline staff would be my suggestion at that level mm-hmm. at first, to find out what's really going on instead of what people want to talk about that's like politically safe for them to talk about.
Thank you, Cori. Thank you, Tina. I just wanted to open up in the chat line. We do have about 6 minutes, but we are ending our session at 10:45 promptly.
Liz, I have a couple of questions.
Yes. Go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah. First of all, we're getting a lot of people. This is an amazing program. We're getting a lot of positive response One question was, are you getting the support you need are you getting the government support you need? Can we as citizens write to our local government to ask for additional support?
Oh,
I think they want to push, they want to,
yeah.
Get from
So,
a...
thank you
Mhm.
for the kind offer. I feel like time and energy and your heart space and your good wishes like that, and your privilege and whatever it is that you're carrying with you, those things. I think that those might be, as opposed to supporting only us. I think that there's many national organizations, there's many international, or there's many local organizations. I mean, we're just a project, right? And once the blueprint is out, y'all can pick it up and move it out there, right?
Fantastic.
To your community, if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so if you would like to write your government, let's talk about Women's Shelters Canada, who's like the national umbrella organization, or follow closely around the National Action Plan in those kinds of ways, right?
That's fantastic. The next question is website. How can we learn more, support? No, we did see it there, but it would be amazing just to mention the website again so people can go on and learn more.
Yeah, so our website is bcsth.ca.
That's very easy.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have a comment from Ellen Campbell from Abuse Hurts. She wants to say thank you for this amazing service you're providing. So we're extremely fortunate to have you two speaking today, bringing not only awareness, but all your efforts that you're doing for the community. So we thank you very much. And we have about 3 minutes left, just less than 3 minutes. So if you want to close, that would be great. If not, we'll close the session.
Well, again, I'd just like to thank everyone for their time, and thank you for the invitation, of course, to talk about cedar blankets. It's been sort of become our lives for, the past couple of years. We have a couple of years left to go, so hold on to your hats, and the blueprint will be out soon, but you'll see us around. And I feel like I would like to express my gratitude for the open-mindedness of people. Indigenous women forever have been disproportionately subjected to violence, whether it's institutional or individual or collective. And we have always managed to find a way to continue to survive. So we survive, and we have our way. And I'm just really grateful that right now, in this time, that our own way of looking after ourselves is being recognized as equally important and equally as valuable as other people's.
Great.
Way,
thank you
as
so much.
non-Indigenous women. Yeah.
Thank you, Cori. Thank you, Tina. We're coming to the end. We're going to hard stop here. So I just want to make sure that everyone has the bcsth.ca. Please go there and look at the handles as well. Thank you. Bye now.